Hey everyone, and welcome to another Konoha Reviews. Today we take a look at the game Dark Souls 3. I have been a huge Dark Souls fan ever since I played the first Dark Souls, and have completed each entry at least 2 times except the third installment. I also never had a chance to play the released DLC, and with the virus still keeping everyone at home, I thought it would be the perfect time to dive into this game once more and rediscover its charms. For many people say that Dark Souls 3 might be the best game in the franchise. Let's find out if that statement indeed holds up. For those who are not too familiar with Dark Souls, I will explain briefly what it is. Dark Souls is an action RPG with a big emphasis on pretty hardcore and difficult gameplay. This means that almost every enemy, not just the bosses, have the potential to kill you as they do big damage and are very aggressive with their attack patterns. But rather than games like Ninja Gaiden, where you have to constantly block and wait for an opportune moment, in Dark Souls, you can really adjust the playstyle to your liking. You can have a sword and shield, and indeed block until you see an opportune moment, or you can make a lighter and more agile and swift character that dodges and deals out quick cuts here and there, or even a magic character that attacks from afar. Now personally, I've never made a magic build before, but would definitely like to try someday. The other big thing, besides the difficult enemies that it's famous for, are your experience points in the form of souls. You get a lot of experience points for killing enemies and bosses that you use to level up. If you get killed, your experience points will be stored one time only at the place where you died, so you have to make your way back to that place and retrieve all that experience. If you don't, or get killed again, you will have lost all of your souls and therefore the experience you've gained until that point. It can be frustrating sometimes, especially with hard bosses, but the feeling whenever you finally beat a boss is like no other and is pure ecstasy. Besides the enemies, there's also a lot of exploration involved to find hidden secrets, items, and shortcuts. Therefore, not only lovers of action games or RPGs will like this, but adventurous gamers who like things like Zelda will find their place in Dark Souls as well. At first glance, it becomes very apparent that the presentation of Dark Souls 3 is indeed amongst the best. The graphics are crisp and beautiful, the frame rate is smooth and steady, and the controls are better than ever. An example of this is the jumping, where in Dark Souls 1 you had to sprint by holding the B button, and then would jump by tapping the B button again. In here, the jump prompt is dedicated to a different button, which makes it all the more easy to pull off a well-timed jump. The pacing of Dark Souls 3 is very well done, and may be a bit easier to deal with for newcomers. In fact, it might be the best learning experience for Dark Souls newbies in general. The starting area has some easy to learn tutorials, introduces the player to enemies that are too strong for now, and that they might want to face at a later time, and introduces a harsh boss right at the beginning. Dark Souls 2, for example, has a long tutorial area that isn't too interesting, and it takes a very long time before you get to the first boss. Dark Souls 1 can be unclear to players on what to do first, though again, it definitely provides the ultimate Dark Souls experience because of it. It literally gives you a crappy weapon right when you encounter your first boss, and it learns you the hard way that you are too weak to really fight that thing unless you want to take tiny pokes at it for a while. Dark Souls 3 is also by far the biggest when it comes to scale. Dark Souls 1 feels very humble and tiny in proportions, which is still very charming in my opinion. But the grand castles, the walls, cities, and towns you can all see in the distance in Dark Souls 3 are great to behold and create a sense of progression as you see areas in the far distance that you have already visited or will visit in the future. Now this was a notion already established in DS1, but still works as well in the newest iteration. What is always cool about Dark Souls games is how open these zones are that you traverse. Often you will find multiple paths that you can take that lead to entire new areas, each with new bosses and new secrets to uncover. Because of this, you always have a sense of something new even if you are stuck at a certain boss. If, for example, you cannot beat a boss, there's always at least 1 or 2 other areas you haven't been to yet that you can explore. You will maybe even find a new or better weapon or armor set that way, and at least level up a bit more, which can help you beat the boss you were stuck at. There are many aspects of Dark Souls that I love, whether it's the exploration, the weapon style customization, or the tense PvP action that can occur when another player invades your game. But the absolute highlight for me, and probably to many, are the boss encounters. Good boss encounters do not only make an impression with how difficult they are, but aesthetically as well, and also the arena that you fight them in. Dark Souls 2 is notorious for some really lazy boss fights, including of course the Royal Rat Vanguard. Luckily, Dark Souls 3 has some of the best boss encounters out there with a lot of variety. Dark Souls 2 has a lot of humanoid bosses, and in DS3 you will fight anything from a giant skeleton monster to an old demon king to a blind dragon type creature that is holding an invisible baby. Now, not all bosses are instant classics, and some are really easy, like the Deacons of the Deep and the Crystal Sage. But bosses like the Abyss Watchers, Pontiff Sullivan, and of course the Nameless King are among some of the coolest bosses in the franchise. Any of the Dark Souls games also offer a lot of replay value, and this is no exception. Often whenever you play a Dark Souls game without a guide for the first time, chances are high you can miss entire zones and bosses. I remember having this shocking experience for the first time in Dark Souls 1, where I missed the Gwendolyn encounter the first time despite having more than 70 hours in my first playthrough. With Dark Souls 3, I missed the Smoldering Lake and Untended Grave zones, meaning I also missed out on 2 boss fights, so it was very satisfying to experience and discover those areas in New Game Plus. The Dark Souls games are amongst the rare games that I love completing multiple times, and really emphasizes how different the experience can be when playing it a second or third time. Another thing that is really cool, and something that gets overlooked by some because it doesn't necessarily adhere to the Dark Souls experience, is the co-op. Co-op has always been a bit difficult to set up to play specifically with your friends, but in Dark Souls 3 it is easier than ever, and they even reused the passport system in Dark Souls 1 Remastered. It works like a charm. With the passport system, you can summon up to 2 players, or even more if you use specific items, and then you can explore each zone together up to the boss, after which you will have to wait until one of the players enters a new zone, and then you can repeat the summoning. It honestly is an absolute blast to tackle the difficult enemies together, though again, it kinda loses the difficulty appeal with regular enemies since you can continuously stagger them, making it very easy to deal with certain enemies that are otherwise quite difficult on your own. There's still your unstaggerable enemy here and there that can even be difficult in co-op, but for co-op the challenge comes in the form of the boss battles. The good thing about playing in co-op is that the boss battles get more HP than usual, which balances out the fact that there are 2 or more players fighting it. But it still feels a bit too easy though, which discourages a lot of us to start playing in co-op as it takes away the challenge a bit. I don't know if there would be a way to fix this, as it would be really cool to experience a Souls game for the first time with some mates while still falling into all the traps and ambushes that From Software has set up. I think Dark Souls 3 is a masterful game, and I realize now as I talk about it that it's really difficult for me to make a comprehensive and coherent story about what's so good about Dark Souls 3, as the things I've mentioned are mostly also represented in the earlier Dark Souls games, though maybe a bit tweaked. And this is due to the fact that the Dark Souls formula stands so good on its own ever since the first iteration. When it comes to some minor points to Dark Souls 3, I honestly cannot necessarily call them really great minor points, as to rather call them inferior to, for example, Dark Souls 1. For you see, even though I have to agree with the notion that when it comes to mechanics, Dark Souls 3 is objectively better, with better learning pace, more weapons and armor, better and more varied bosses, incredible scale and environments, the truth is that I would still recommend people to start with Dark Souls 1, since that for me is still the utmost and truest of experiences. The fact how that game slaps you over the head with a tough boss fight at the beginning, with you having zero knowledge of how the game works, with the fact that you can go in 2 different directions at the beginning, and that one of those is utterly pointless because it's way too difficult for your character at that level, and eventually you will head towards a door that you cannot open until you first do something else. And I found this out the hard way, and for the first 30 hours or so, I had such a terrible time with the game until I understood that I missed a small door in the opposite side of the world, which I could open with a key that led me towards the sewers. And that taught me to really read item descriptions and not take any item for granted. Also, the revelation of a difficult boss fight, like the Gargoyle, only to be greeted halfway through by a second one, is legendary. The level design in Dark Souls 1 is still the most perfect of all 3 Souls games, with shortcuts and paths leading and connecting everywhere and back again. And finally, the upper build-up towards these legendary figures like Nito, Gwyn, and the Scaleless Dragon is incredible, with you only getting access to these boss fights many hours in. This build-up, the level design, and just shocking twists and turns have never been surpassed in its sequels in my opinion. This is why, even though I think indeed that objectively Dark Souls 3 is better, I still would say that Dark Souls 1 is the one you need to play first to experience it fully. I will definitely make a video about Dark Souls 1 someday, which I think is an absolute masterpiece. Maybe a slightly flawed masterpiece with some of its mechanics, but a masterpiece nonetheless. But for now, Dark Souls 3 ends up with a 9.1, an excellent entry in the series. I've also had a chance to play the DLC of Dark Souls 3, and I won't really get into them all too much, unless you all want to see me do DLC reviews as well on this channel. But I thought Ashes of Ariandel was fun, but way too small, with only 2 boss fights, of which 1 was optional. Some of the enemy design was very cool though, especially the Horror Tree ladies. And Ring City was very cool, though it had a bit of a bleak and slow start. But once you had your first boss fight and you arrive at the Ring City, it is an absolute must play, and has some of the coolest boss fights and arenas yet, with the exception of the repeated PvP boss fight, which by then was not that original anymore.